In this video, we'll create a Bootstrap 4 theme from scratch. Okay guys, so let's take a look at the Bootstrap theme before we get started. So in the upper left hand corner we have the logo where it says Nest, and then off to the right we have our Bootstrap navigation menu or nav bar, and then underneath that we have the landing page image that takes up the full screen with the title and the Get Started button above the fixed image landing screen. So if we select one of the navigation links, it's going to take us to different sections of the page using something called Bootstrap Scrolls By. So that'll scroll us down to the About section, for example, or the Portfolio section. And then just underneath our full screen landing page here in the About section, we have 3 different Bootstrap columns, which will transition into a single column layout. And then underneath that, we have the Portfolio section with the 2-column layout and no space in between our Bootstrap columns. And then for the Testimonials section, we'll be using what's called Bootstrap cards to display the images, the title, and the paragraph for each one of the cards. Then at the very bottom, of course, we have the footer section with some contact information centered along with the logo. And before we take a look at the mobile version of the website and I give you the starter files to get started with the tutorial, I want to share with you that I've just completed my first Udemy course that features the full version, as you see here, of the Nest responsive Bootstrap theme. So if you want to check out the complete version of the theme and the course, go ahead and check out the link in the video description. And I'm also going to include a coupon in the video description. Just remember, if you go ahead and get the theme or template along with the Nest course, please leave a review for me in Udemy. Okay, so back to the YouTube version of the theme that we'll be developing here. Let's take a look at the mobile version of the Nest website. So once we get down to 768 pixels, it's going to transform into the mobile version. And as you can see, the navigation has turned into the collapsible Bootstrap navigation you see here. And when we click on one of the navigation links, it's still going to send us down to the appropriate section of the page. And as you can see also, our 3-column and 2-column sections have now shifted into a single column once we get down to the medium screen width or 768 pixels with Bootstrap. Okay, so now let's scroll back up to the top, or we could hit the logo, the Nest logo, since it's a one-page theme. That'll bring us back to the top also. And let's expand it back to the full width. Okay, so in the description of this video, along with the link to the Udemy course version, will be a link to the starter files for the YouTube tutorial here. So inside of the Nest theme starter files, we'll have index.html and style.css. I'm going to be using the free text editor called Sublime Text to build our theme, and then also included in the files will be all of the images that we'll need to build the theme. So open on the left, I have Google Chrome where we'll be viewing the theme as we build it. And then on the right here, as you can see, I have Sublime Text open. So as you can see here in Sublime Text, we already have a little bit of CSS and the start of our HTML document laid out for us. What I want to do is just make sure that I'm connected to Google Chrome here though, before we go over what's already included for us with the starter files. So I'll just write a little bit of information in here, and as you can see, I'm connected to Google Chrome on the left. Okay, so starting from the top, we have our doc type HTML for the HTML tag. Then inside of that, we have our head section. And then at the top of our head section, we have our character set, which is a standard UTF-8. And underneath that, we have the meta name viewport content with device with initial scale 1 meta tag for responsiveness or mobile versions. And then we have, of course, the title of our website underneath that, which if you're unfamiliar with where it's going to display, that's going to be up here on the tab at the top of your browser, in this case Google Chrome, And then going back to index.html, underneath the title, we have a link to the latest version of Bootstrap CSS, which happens to be Bootstrap 4.1. Then we have a link to the style sheet right here, style.css, that's included in the starter files. And then in the body section of the website at the bottom, we have our script source files, starting with the latest version of jQuery, and then the latest version of Bootstrap.js, which is also Bootstrap 4.1. So the first thing that we're going to add to the index.html file here will be inside of the actual body tag. So at the top of our website with our nav bar, the Bootstrap Scroll Spy feature, or Scroll Spy, that links us to different sections of the page also gets highlighted when we scroll down to certain sections of the page. So what we're going to do is we're going to incorporate that into the body tag here. Okay, so we're going to say body data-spy equals scroll, and then data-target, and then this will be the ID that we're going to give our menu. So we'll just say hashtag menu. And then what we'll need to do is we'll need to reference a different ID per section of the website that we scroll to, so the navigation knows to light up once we scroll to that section. So the first one at the top, we're just going to call it the home section. So we'll add an invisible HTML comment here saying start home section. And then inside of that, we'll have our div ID, which we'll simply call home. Okay, and then we can drop down and add the closing div tag, and then write that this is the end of the home section with our invisible HTML comment here. Okay, so everything inside of this section will stay lit up, or the home navigation link will stay lit up rather. So now let's go ahead and let's start with the actual navigation bar at the top of the website. So I'm going to create another invisible comment here just saying navigation, so we know it's the start of our navigation menu. And then let's start our navigation off with the HTML5 nav tag, and then we'll give it a class that's called navbar, and then navbar-dark, since we're going to be using the dark version of the Bootstrap navigation, and then bg-dark for our background color as dark. So now we see a little bit to the start of our navigation bar. And then since the navigation expands and contracts at the 768 pixel mark, which is the medium screen mark with Bootstrap, we're going to say navbar-expand MD for medium, or 768. And then lastly, since it stays fixed at the top of the screen, we'll say fixed-top. Okay, so then we can drop down and close out the nav tag, and inside of that, we're going to add a divider tag here, or div tag, to make sure that the navigation takes up 100% of the screen, as you can see here. So we're going to use a div class with Bootstrap that's called container-fluid, and anything inside of container fluid will take up 100% of the browser or window that you're viewing the website with. Okay, so then we can close out the div, and then inside of this, let's go ahead and start off with our logo. So we'll say a class, since it's a link, we'll use the a tag, and then navbar-brand is the class for the logo with Bootstrap Navigations, and we'll just leave the link blank. So that's going to keep us on the same page and link us back up to the top of the website when we click on it. And then inside of our link, we'll have our image for the logo. So that's inside of the img folder, and then the image URL or file name is nest.png. So img/nest.png. Okay, so there we have the nest image, and it's looking kind of large, so let's go ahead and let's go over to style.css, and I'm just going to create a quick style here to make it so the navbar brand image, or our logo, stays at a height of 2 rem. So if you're unfamiliar with rem, 1 rem is equal to 16 pixels with Google Chrome, so this would be 32 pixels in height, and rem is the default size or metric that we use for Bootstrap. Okay, so there we have our logo fitting into the nav bar, similar to the original, and let's drop down and let's add the button here next for the drop down section of our navigation menu. So we're going to wrap this with a button tag, and then we're going to give it a class, and the default class for the toggle is navbar-toggler with Bootstrap 4, and then we'll say type button and data-toggle collapse, because we want our menu to open and collapse when we click on the button. And then lastly, we'll say data-target, and this will be the ID that we're going to give our menu, which is #menu. Okay, so inside of that, now we can go ahead and add the bars, since we just have kind of a blank button here. So we'll go ahead and add the 3 bars here. So we used to have to add each one individually with Bootstrap 3. With Bootstrap 4, we can just use a simple class called navbar-toggler-icon inside of a span tag, and that's going to display all 3 of the bars for our burger menu or drop-down navigation button. Okay, so now we can go ahead and add our div for the actual collapsible section of our navigation. So we're going to say div class, and let me just expand this. Okay, so we're going to say div class collapse, and then navbar-collapse, and then we'll give it the ID we've been referencing, which is simply menu without the hashtag here. So div ID menu, which we can really call whatever we want here. I just decided on menu because it's simple. And then let's go ahead and add our unordered list, which will of course have our list items and individual navigation links inside of it. So underneath div class collapse, we'll have ul class navbar-nav, and then ml-auto, which will shift our navigation links off to the right side of the screen, as opposed to mx-auto, for example, which will center our navigation links. And then inside of our unordered list, we'll have our first list item, and each one of our list items will have the same class, which is nav-item, and then inside of our list item we'll have a link class called nav-link, followed by the actual link, and then we'll have the text inside of our link. But what I'm going to do to make it easier on us is we have 5 different navigation links, so I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste each one of these list items out. So all we need to add is the link here. So our first one, of course, is home, and this will be linking us to the home section or home ID. So it'll be #home, and then the actual text for the link is home, and I'm going to capitalize it. So there we have our first navigation link. Later in the CSS, we'll make them appear as they sit here. But let's add the rest of them. So we have about, portfolio, and then we have testimonials, and then contact. So we haven't added the div IDs to link to each one of these sections yet, but we will as we work down index.html. So just remember to add the actual text that will appear for the links with portfolio, testimonials, contact after you've added about. Okay, so if we refresh, there we have all 5 of our navigation links, and then once we flex down to underneath 768 pixels or the medium width in Bootstrap, we have the collapsible drop-down navigation menu appearing. So the next thing we'll do is let's go ahead and move on down the page, and we'll move on to the landing page section of the theme. And similar to the navigation, I'm going to go ahead and create an invisible HTML comment here saying this is the start of the landing page. Okay, so let's go ahead and start off with a div class that we're simply going to call div class landing. And inside of this div, we'll have 2 additional div classes. The first one being home-wrap and div class home-inner, and then we can close out the div classes. So these div classes already have style included for them in style.css. The reason being because they're necessary for the landing page to display properly on cell phones, in particular iPhones or the iOS. So here we have the style that's already included for us. The only thing that we'll be doing is adding the actual image that we'll be using for the background image of the landing page in the CSS. Everything is already done for us aside from that. So let's move on to the title and the button section. So we'll drop down underneath the start landing page section, and let's create a new comment saying start landing page caption. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and create a new div class, and we'll just call it caption. And then we'll use a Bootstrap class called center block that's going to center everything inside of this div on the page. And then we'll also use the text center class, which will take care of obviously centering our text. Okay, so now we can go ahead and add the heading for the Nest responsive Bootstrap theme text that we're seeing here. So we're going to use a heading 3 to add this. So Nest responsive Bootstrap theme. And then underneath that we have the button, which will wrap with a link. So A class btn and then btn-outline-light is the class for this particular Bootstrap button, which will give us a clear inside to it and the light outline. And then for the link, that's just going to link us to the about section. So we'll say hashtag about. And then inside of it, we obviously have the get started text. And then we'll close out the link or button. Okay, so now let's go back over to the version we've been working on. And it's displaying underneath the landing page area for right now. But later we'll shift it so it displays on top of the landing page section. So it's going to look a little scattered until we get over to style.css, but let's move on to the about section. So you might notice that the about section is a darker shade than the rest of the page around it. And what that is that's called a Jumbotron section with Bootstrap. So before we get to the Jumbotron, let's lay out the ID for the about section of the website. So the Bootstrap Scroll Spy knows to light up the navigation menu for that particular section, and so the navigation menu link as well as other links can send us straight to the About section. Okay, Okay, so then I'm going to add a comment saying this is the end of the About section. Alright, so now we can go ahead and add the Jumbotron. Okay, so we're going to write a div class Jumbotron, which will form the gray section that we're seeing here. And then we'll add the content inside of it. So div class Jumbotron, and then we'll want to close out the div for our Jumbotron, and I'm also going to create a note here saying this is the end of the Jumbotron. And then the first thing that we have inside of the Jumbotron section will be the heading, but let's just make sure that it appears gray here. Okay, so there we have the Jumbotron section. And the background of the landing page, as you can see, is matched to the color of the Jumbotron, which I didn't mention earlier. So let's add the About title here, which is a heading 3 tag. And we're going to call this h3 class heading, and then we'll just write About and then close out the heading 3 tag, and then we'll take care of the styling later in style.css. Okay, so underneath that we have the 3-column section, and what we'll want to do is we'll want to wrap the columns in a row. So let's drop down underneath our heading 3, and we're going to say div class row, and then along with the closing About and Jumbotron divs, we'll close out the div for the row here and create a comment saying this is the end of the row. Okay, so now we can go ahead and add the 3-column section. So if you know anything about Bootstrap, you know that there are 12 columns in total. So to get the 3 columns, we'll just divide 3 into 12 and we get 4. And then just remember that it has the medium breakpoint at 768 pixels. So with that, we'll say div class column or col dash MD or 768 and 4. So basically anything over 768 pixels, it's going to display at 4 out of the 12 columns, and then we'll also use the text center class to center all of the text that we'll have inside of the column here. And inside of each one of the columns we'll have a heading 4 and a paragraph section. So I'm just going to create a blank H4 and P tag here, and then what we can do is just copy and paste the whole div class col MD4 and text center class here twice. So we'll paste that in twice, and then all we need to do is add the heading 4 and the paragraph text. So we'll start off with the full screen landing text here, and then I'll paste in the paragraph text. You can just write what you want or use dummy text. Okay, and then I'm just going to paste in the contact form information, which the full version of the Nest theme features a functioning contact form that sends messages to your email address. So that's where we're getting this info about the contact form and the smooth scrolling links, for example. So now if we refresh, there we have the first and last of the columns filled out, and the middle one is blank, as you can see, but still taking up the space on the page. And then I'm just going to add the heading 4 smooth scrolling text, and then the paragraph text about the smooth scrolling. Alright, so now if we go back to the version we're working on in Google Chrome and refresh, there we have all 3 of the columns filled out, and once we flex it down to 768 pixels, it's going to turn into the single column mobile or tablet version of the website. So we'll do more of the styling once we get over to style.css, as I've said, but let's move down to the portfolio section of the website next. So similar to the home section and the about section, what we'll do is let's start off the portfolio section with a comment saying that this is the start of the portfolio section, and then we'll add the ID for the Bootstrap scroll spy and the navigation to link us to this section of the website. So start portfolio section and then div ID portfolio. And then we can drop down and close out the div, and I'm going to say that this is the end of the portfolio section. And as you may have noticed, the portfolio section will take up, or the images rather, will take up 100% of the screen. So we're going to use that div class container fluid Bootstrap class again, similar to what we used in the navigation, to take up 100%. And then I'm going to end it off here with a comment saying this is the end of the container fluid. Closing div. Okay, and then before we add the heading 3 with the portfolio text, let's add some additional space in here above that heading 3. So we're going to add a class that we're just going to call padding, and later we'll style that class to add some additional padding below the Jumbotron section and above the portfolio heading. So let's go ahead and add that now with the h3 class heading, similar to the about section, and then we'll just write portfolio and close out the heading 3. And there we have our portfolio text. And then similar to the columns that we had in the about section, we're going to go ahead and wrap the columns for the portfolio section with a div class row. So div class row, and then we're going to add an additional class here to take away the padding in between the columns that are default with Bootstrap, and we're just going to say no dash padding for that class, for the custom class we'll be adding. And then let's close out the div for the row and create a comment saying this is the end of the row. Okay, so similar to what we did with the 3-column section, 4 goes into 12, or 3 goes into 12 4 times rather. So 2 goes into 12 6 times. So what we'll do is we'll say col md6 rather than col md4. So it's still going to break at the 768 pixel mark and turn into a single column underneath that width. And then inside of each column we'll have an image, and we're going to give the image a class. So we'll say img class, and we'll just call it portfolio, and then we'll have the source for each one of the image files. So I'm just going to say img /.png, and then what we can do is we can copy and paste the div class with the image class inside of it 3 times for all 4 images. So each one of the portfolio images here is simply 1.png to 4.png. So we'll have 1, 2, 3, 4 to make it easy on us. And if we save and refresh, we should have all 4 images displaying, as you see here, but they're not displaying at full width, which we'll correct in the CSS later on. Okay, so let's go ahead and drop down to the testimonials section next. So similar to what we did above, we'll want to create a new ID for the testimonials section along with our comment. So we'll say start testimonials section, and then div ID testimonials, and then we can close out the div, and I'm going to leave a comment here saying this is the end of the testimonials section. All right, and then let's add our heading H3 class. So to get our testimonials text up here, so that's going to be H3 class heading, and then testimonials, and then we can close out the heading 3. All right, and then similar to above, we'll have a need a row here to have our columns inside of. So we'll say div class row, and then we're also going to add some padding along with this row. And then let's close out the div and leave a comment saying this is the end of the row. Okay, and then similar to the portfolio section, we're just going to have 2 columns. And as you know, 2 goes into 12 6 times. So again, we'll use the div class colMD6. Okay, and then we can drop down and close out the div. And inside of that, we'll have what's called a card, which will contain our image and text inside of the box here. So we're going to say div class card, and all of the text inside of it will be centered, so we'll use that class with Bootstrap as our shortcut here. And then we can close out the div for the div class card, and inside of it, the first thing that we'll have will be the image. Okay, so that's going to have a class, and we'll say img class card dash img so image class card dash img dash top, because the image is appearing at the top. And then for our source, we'll have img/5.png, which is the image of the guy at the desk there. So now if we refresh, we should have the start of our card here, as you can see. And you know it's in the card because of the rounded corners, or the border radius. And let's drop down to the card body next. So we'll say div class card body, and then we'll close out the div for that, and we can include any content we want, but in this case we simply have a heading 4 where it says John Lee, and then underneath that we have a quote, a paragraph quote, where it says, I have over 10 years of experience in technology and haven't come across a better service. Okay, so now if we refresh in Google Chrome, there we have the card with the image at the top, and then the body with the heading 4 and the paragraph section. So the second card is basically the same thing. I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste this one to save us some time, and then all we need to do is change the image to image 6, and then the name from John Lee to Jessica Miller. All right, so let's refresh. And there we have the second card displaying. And if you're concerned with the padding or margin around the cards, we'll be covering that in the CSS to make it a little more fluid and to make it look like the original. Okay, so lastly, for the HTML, let's go ahead and drop down to the contact section. Okay, so let's go and move down to underneath the end of the testimonial section, and we'll say this is the start of the contact section. So once we've added this HTML comment, let's add our contact ID. So div ID contact. And then we can drop down and close out the div, and I'm going to create a comment saying this is the end of the contact section. Okay, so one thing that you might notice is the background color of the contact section takes up 100% of the screen, as you can see here. So once again, we're going to use the div class container fluid Bootstrap class. So it takes up the full window, and then we're also going to give this an additional class that we're just going to call footer, so we can add some additional styling to it. And then let's create a comment saying that this is the end of the container fluid footer section. Okay, so next let's go ahead and add a row, and I'll explain why we're adding a row in just a second. But first let's just write div class row, and then we can close out the div and write end row. So we really only have one row that's displaying, or one column rather that's displaying, but in order to get it centered on the page, what we're going to do is we're going to add an additional column right here that's just going to be basically blank filler space, and then once we get down to the mobile version, that column isn't going to appear at all. Okay? So the column where the content actually lies is going to take up 1/2 of the page, and the first one will be 25%. So col MD3 right here would be a normal column that you'd use for a 4-section or 4-column layout. So we'll have col MD3, and that's just going to be a blank column, and then col MD6, and then I'm just going to write text center. And we don't need to add an additional col MD3 afterwards because it's just going to be blank space anyways. So inside of col MD6, let's go ahead and start off with our logo at the top. So we'll just write image source img/nest.png for the logo image. Okay, so now if we refresh, it's going to, it's a white logo, so it's not going to appear until we add the background color. But let's go ahead and just add the content in underneath that. Okay, so we have a paragraph tag or section underneath that, and I'm just going to paste the text in here, and then we have a bold section where it says our location, so we'll use the strong tag for bold text. And then underneath that we have the street name paragraph section. So I'll just copy this and paste it. And then to create a new line, we'll just use the BR or break tag in between 100 street name and our city. Okay, so there we have the bold text and then the street name and the city underneath it. And then let's do the same with the contact info section. So again, we'll use the strong tag for the bold text where it says contact info, and then underneath that we'll use the paragraph tag, and again we'll just use the break tag to create a new line for the email there. Okay, so now if we go and refresh, there we have the remaining bit of our content, and that does it for all of our HTML, and the rest of the tutorial will be done in style.css as we add the necessary styling to make it look like the original. So let me just do away with this extra space and let's move over to style.css. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, we already have a little bit of CSS included for us, and what we're going to do is drop down underneath the overflow X hidden for the right gutter fix CSS, and let's move on to giving our font a different font family. So we're going to use the font family sans serif, and then let's change the color to make it a little bit of a softer gray than the dark gray that we're seeing with the color 505 962 for the hex value. So now if we go ahead and refresh, there we have the text looking a little rounder with the sans serif font and a little bit softer with that lighter color. So next, let's move on to our navigation bar at the top. So let's see what we'll need to reference in index.html here, which is simply the navbar class. So we'll reference that to select the navbar, and then let's make our text uppercase with text transform uppercase, and then let's give the background color of our navbar the same shade that we gave our font for the overall body. And what we can do is we can take away bg-dark, which is the background color, as you can see here when we've taken it away, for the navigation bar. Okay, so let's move back over to style.css, and we'll just say background color, and then the same hex value 505962. Okay, so now if we refresh, there we have our navbar looking just like the original here. So let's move on down underneath the navbar, and let's add our background image for the landing page section. So we're going to use the home inner class that's already referenced here, because all of our landing page style, other than adding the actual background image, is included for us already due to the fixes needed for iPhones and iPads. So we'll just say home inner background dash image, and then URL in parentheses and a single quote. That's going to be the img folder, and then landing.png. So img/landing.png, and then if you refresh, there we have our landing page staying fixed, or landing page background staying fixed, and we have the content underneath it scrolling on top of it. So next, let's move the heading and the button that appears inside of the div class caption that we created on top of the landing page. So we'll reference the div class caption with .caption for the class, and then let's give it a width of 100%. And then we'll also want to give it a max width of 100%, so the text inside of the caption class doesn't go outside of it as we flex the page down towards the mobile width. And then we're also going to say position absolute, because when we scroll, the text is going to stay absolute. It's not going to stay fixed on top of the landing page. And then we'll just say top 40%. And that's going to make it appear 40% from the top of the page when we land on it, which it does right here. And then for good measure, we can say z-index1 to make sure that it displays on top of the landing page image across different browsers. So let's go ahead and style our heading text next. So that's going to be the heading 3 inside of the caption class. And let me just change this to nest from next. So we'll say .caption h3, and then we'll just make the color white. You can write white, or the hex value for white is FFF. And then font size, we'll say 2.4 rem, which is around 40 pixels. And then we'll want to make the text uppercase to match the original, so text transform uppercase. Okay. And then lastly, let's add the additional space or padding in between that and the button. So we'll say padding bottom 2 rem, which is the equivalent of 32 pixels. Okay, so that's looking pretty good until we get down to the button. And then when we size it down, it stays on the page, similar to the finished version. All right, so let's go and check out the class for the button, which is simply btn. And we'll reference that here with period btn. And then let's change the border width. And rather than using a pixel, we'll just say medium, or a rem for that matter. So that's going to give us the medium width border. And then let's take away the rounded corners with border radius 0 to give it the boxy feel. And next, let's change the text to uppercase. Text transform uppercase. And let's change the padding around the text to 0.5 rem top bottom, 1.1 rem left right to space it out a little bit more. Okay. And then the actual font size is a little bit smaller in the original. So let's change the font size to 0.9 rem. Okay, so now if we refresh, we can't tell them apart until we scroll down and we look for the next thing we'll want to change to make it look like the original, which is the heading where it says about. And the styling for that will also affect the portfolio heading and the testimonials heading, which we use the same class for, which is h3 class heading. Okay, so to select that class, we'll just say h3 dot heading, and then we'll want them aligned center, so we'll say text align center. And then let's change the font size so we'll increase the font size to 1.9 rem, and then we'll make it uppercase. So let's say text transform uppercase. And that's looking pretty good, except for we'll want to create a little bit of space underneath the headings. So we'll say margin bottom 1.9 rem. Okay, so that's looking pretty good until we get down to the portfolio section, where the images aren't displaying at 100% and we have some padding issues that we want to correct above the portfolio text. And then we'll mess with the padding for the portfolio section itself. So if you remember, we added this padding class here inside of the portfolio section. So let's go ahead and address that by adding some additional padding to the top and bottom of that class. So we'll say padding 2 rem top bottom and 0 left right. Okay, so now we have some additional padding there for us that goes along with the portfolio heading and the testimonials heading. And the next thing that we'll do is let's make our images for the portfolio section display at 100%, and that's going to expose the padding issue for the portfolio. So we'll say img.portfolio and then max width 100%. So now if we refresh, there we have the images displaying as we want them to, but we have the padding in between the columns here in the center. So if you remember in the HTML, what we did is we added a class where it says no padding to the row containing the portfolio columns. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and select the no padding class and then the columns that follow it. So we'll say .col-md-6 and then we'll simply say padding 0. Alright, so now if we refresh, there we have the portfolio images taking up 100% of the row there inside of their columns. So next, let's drop down to the cards section. What we'll want to do is add some additional margin around the cards so they're not pushed up against the sides of our browser. So we'll want to reference the card class here, which is .card, and then we'll just say margin 2 rem all around. Alright, so now if we refresh, there we have them spaced out and looking just like the original. Alright, so it looks pretty good until we get down to the footer or contact section. So what we'll want to do is select the footer class that we added so we can give it the background color, and we'll select the row inside of the footer class. So we'll say .footer and then .row, and let's give it its background color, which will be the same hex value we've been using throughout the theme, 505962. And now if we go and refresh, there we have our background color, but we can't see the text, and our logo is looking pretty big here. So let's go ahead and take care of that. So we'll get to it with the footer class and then img, and let's give it the same height as the logo at the top of the website in the nav bar, which is 2 rem. And now if we refresh, there we have our logo resized, but we'll want to add some padding around it. So let's go ahead and do that next. So just underneath where we added the height, let's say padding 1 rem. So that's going to be 1 rem on the top. And let's just apply this to around the entire footer section. So 1 rem on the top, then we'll say 2 rem on the sides or left and right, and 3 rem on the bottom. And let's change the color to white, and we're actually going to apply these styles to the footer and row, because if we add it to the image, it's obviously not going to apply here. So let's just copy it and we'll paste it to the footer class followed by the row class above. Okay, and now if we go and refresh, there we have it looking pretty good except for the margin underneath the or around the logo image. So we'll just say margin 1.5 rem top bottom and 0 left right. Alright, so now if we go and refresh, there we have it looking just like the original, and once we get past 768 pixels, it flexes down to take up half of the page. Okay, so that does it. I want to thank you for sticking around with me through the tutorial. Please remember to check out the full version of the Nest responsive Bootstrap theme with my Udemy course found in the video's description. and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.